Thank you. Good afternoon. I'm happy to be here today. It's a great honor and pleasure to speak to you today. My task is to introduce the panel, that is, say, which systems and institutions define the world and are they appropriate for our times. I'd like to begin with some simple pictures. Now, let's just get started. This is Immanuel Kant. I'm sure you've all seen and heard of him. Now, you can talk about a certain type of institutionalism in the Western world. I'd like to begin by saying what systems define the world. As Ms. Flick said in her introduction, it's not a question of all the institutions worldwide. I'll be talking here about a very small number of Western institutions. That's what I'll be focusing on. Western institutions, what are we talking about when we talk about institutions? We're talking both about formal and informal institutions. These are both formal rules, formal organizations, and then we also have ideas, democracy, constitutionalism, all sorts of other things that are not tangible: morals, religion, capital, cultural rules that define our cultural life and define them together. These are a type of relief for us. So without institutions, we really could not take a step outside because we wouldn't know what we were supposed to do. These are institutions. They're very important for human cooperation. That's why we want to hold on to these institutions, even if we're in a crisis. But of course, there can be too much. Incidents can become totalitarian. And so that they don't become totalitarian, which is the case in many authoritarian systems, as for example, in different religious or moral systems, what we have here is what we call an liberal institutional consensus. And goes back to the era of enlightenment with the 18th century. Kant was one of the protagonists here in this way of thinking. So the whole meaning behind all of this liberal way of thinking and enlightenment is to see institutions so that they do not become totalitarian, so that people, human beings, can be guided in these institutions, but they're still free to change them. This applies both for institutions at a very low level, private, as well as for state institutions. People should always be free to redefine things. That is the basic idea of the world in which we are living today. Now, what does this world consist of? I've noted down 5 different elements. I'll be showing them to you one after the other, and then after the panel or with the panel, we can discuss them. So the first one is the world in which we live. And this world of liberal constitutional consensus is a state where the state and society are separate. The state has a limited task. It's there for society and not society for the state. Between the state and society, there is a dividing line. The society is autonomous. It is protected by the state, by human rights, by basic rights, and the members of society, that's all of us, can do whatever we want in this society. We have freedom. It's autonomy. Again, that is the basic idea behind the liberal society. If we want to have rules for something, then we have to come to these states and then we have to work together and work on these rules. But state and society are separate. So let's take a look at the problems that we have. I have a nice little picture here for you. So what you see here, sometimes it doesn't work all that well when we talk about the separation between state and society. And then, of course, we also have the state is often being criticized because it doesn't seem that they're performing their duties as they should. Failure in regulation, delegitimation of state institutions. What are the problems that we've got? That the state is pushed to its limits. We've heard about some problems, the climate crisis. The state cannot do all that much anymore, or what the state does is on a local level, and the problem is a much larger one. So where is the state to play here? Migration, for example, global migration, lack of equality. These are all things which the state has really reached its limits. That was the first point. Now, the second one is at a state level, we have institutions. These are democratic institutions. That's part of our society and the way it's set up. We have collective autonomy, and we can here take state institutions that can be shaped by these. So this is, again, something that we've had consensus on for 3 centuries, but that's our probably problem as well. Again, there's a lot of pressure on the democratic institutions. Pressure on the one hand from within, because we see people like this with signs like this, posters like this in the United States, but this is also seen here as well in Germany. And we can see they're running around in democracies or democratic systems are all of a sudden tending to tip towards anti-democracy. And we can see all of this is coming from within democracy. On the other hand, the pressure also comes from the outside, because if we're in a system, we have competition from authoritarian countries, for example, China, or elsewhere worldwide, or just take a look to Russia, to Turkey, to other countries. So that is democracy. The third topic is we talk about the nation state, the world system broken down into nation states. I say this is a simplification, of course. There are a lot of supranational or international organizations as well, but basically the addressee here is to take collective autonomy in society and to put it together in the nation state. Now, what is the problem here? Here again, we can see that the nation state, this whole idea that we live as people in nation states and that we have a collective identity. And this is then defined by the common nation state. This is something that has become a bit wobbly and is under a lot of pressure. I've listed a couple of terms here: post nationalism, or post colonialism, or post Western world order. So this is a broad reaching topic. Number 4, then. Let's take a look down to society. In society, we have private autonomy. Private people, individuals, are free to shape their relationships as they like. And this means that we have economic ties, and these are becoming market economic ties. And then we also have property rights, and this is then capitalistic. This is a capitalistic economic order. This is how they're organized. Capitalism is a wonderful mechanism that has lasted for the last 500 years, starting from the West, starting from Europe, starting from Europe. But here it has created a lot of prosperity. But here, for some time now, we've noticed that there have been questions asked here. This is a picture we've all seen. This was the factory in Bangladesh that collapsed in 2013. Well, these days, it's 10 years ago, almost exactly 10 years and 3 months ago, that this factory collapsed. What is this? We have global capitalism. We consume things cheap, and we have good consumer protection rights. But at the other end of the world, things look like this. Can that be the right way to have things? That's a big question mark. So the problem is that private autonomy in society, our private economic owner, has always managed to create a lack of equality. It worked very well for a very long time, but there are limits. And we see that these limits are being felt. And I think we should really take a look and see, where do we see these limits and how are we going to deal with them? In the final analysis, the danger is so great that democracy and rule of law are being called into question. The last topic I'd like to touch upon, we haven't talked about that at all so far. It's not only a question of formal institutions, but also informal institutions. We can talk about the cultural background, religion, morals, and here we can say we can talk about the sense of community in a society. What does this consist of? The most important thing here about liberal consensus is the idea that everything that is religion or personal conviction, this is something that cannot be part of the state level. It's part of the private level. Religion is private. Everyone is free to believe whatever they want to believe and to think whatever they want to think and to pray however they want to pray. The problem is, this is where we are also reaching our limits, and that is why this, of course, is something that's been talked about for a long time now. Here you can see a very famous quote from a German legal expert, Ernst Wolfgang Wickenperter. Maybe you've heard about him. And it's a very nice quote. Free, secularized state lives on prerequisites which the state cannot guarantee. So Birkenfurter is indicating that liberalism is a type of paradox. So in other words, when we talk about needing capital for the substrate that we have in our construction, this is a two-part construction which cannot be reflected. Religion, morals, the feeling of common weal. This is something, the idea of the society and the whole community, everything that we are based on. That's what we're all talking about here in Western states. This is also something that is coming under pressure. And this is another question that we need to address. So I'd like to thank you for your attention. And that was just a brief introduction. Now I'd like to introduce the panel, a very famous panel. Here we have Professor Clemens Fuest, who is president of the IFO, Institute for Economic Research, and a professor of economics at the Munich University. We have Professor Jörn Leonhard. He has a chair of new and recent history in Western University at the Albert University in Freiburg. Then we have Professor Wolfgang Schörn, my colleague, a director at the Max Planck Institute for Tax Law and Finances in Munich. And I'm also happy to have the ability to discuss this together. So I'd like to introduce you all to ask questions afterwards. So I'd like to ask the participants to come up on stage, please. Thank you very much.